I've already settled it for myself, so flattery and criticism go down the same drain, and I'm quite free. And very hard thing to put into action to actually integrate, but it's become so ingrained in my mind because it was there before it actually applied to me.
Before Meghan Markle became royalty, there was another part of her life she never talks about. Her first marriage with Joe Guiliano. It was a union hidden long before Prince Harry ever came along. But now, Joe has finally spoken out, and what he's revealing about Meghan's past is darker than anyone imagined.
What was hard to get over was being blamed for something that not only I didn't do, but that happened to me.
Why was their marriage kept so quiet? And what secrets from that chapter could change everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle? Join us as we reveal the untold truth behind Meghan's first husband, Meghan Markle and Joe Guiliano's secret marriage. Before the royal headlines and palace spotlight, Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, had lived a chapter of her life that almost no one talks about. It's a chapter hidden behind fame, carefully left out of the royal storybooks. Long before Prince Harry, there was another man, Joe Guiliano. Back then, Meghan wasn't a popular figure. She was just another ambitious young woman in Hollywood, chasing a dream that felt almost impossible. Fresh out of Northwestern University, where she studied theater and international studies, Meghan had started landing small acting jobs, background roles, brief appearances, anything to get her foot in the door. Friends from that time described her as polite, focused, and incredibly driven. She always knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to go after it. But she met a man that completely changed her story. And that's where Meghan's story gets interesting. Joe Guiliano came from a completely different world. He was a family-oriented guy from a traditional Italian-American household in Chicago. The Guiliano family was known for their strong values. You know, Sunday dinners, deep family ties, and an old-fashioned sense of privacy. Joe worked in marketing, and everyone who knew him described him as calm, loyal, and the kind of man who didn't chase the spotlight. When Meghan walked into his life, everything changed. Joe was instantly drawn to her energy, her charm, and her confidence. To outsiders, they looked perfect together, a couple that could easily blend in at a neighborhood barbecue. Not long after, Meghan and Joe decided to get married. But this wasn't a grand wedding with family, friends, or flashing cameras. There were no invitations, no white gowns and glossy magazines. It was quiet, almost secret. Some said it happened in a small ceremony with only a handful of witnesses. Others claimed it was done privately, away from both families. For Joe, the simplicity didn't matter. He was in love, and that was enough. But for Meghan, the reasons behind the secrecy seemed more complicated. According to people close to Meghan at that time, she didn't want anyone to make things difficult. Others believed she wanted to keep her personal life out of the spotlight because she was finally making progress in her acting career. She was meeting casting directors, attending industry events, and starting to be noticed. Meghan didn't want anything, not even marriage, to limit her opportunities. Whatever her reasons, the quiet union rapidly descended into a complicated story. Friends noticed a change. It was thought subtle, but it was real. Meghan was becoming more private, more careful about what she said and who she said it to. But that wasn't all. Joe stayed. He was open, trusting, and deeply in love. Remember, the two of them came from worlds that didn't quite fit together. For Meghan, she was hungry for something more. That couldn't be found in quiet suburbs or family dinners. Joe, however, found happiness in that simplicity. He didn't crave fame or power. He just wanted love, stability, and a future built on trust. And that difference was what began to pull them apart. The exact details of their marriage remain blurry to this day. Some say it was dissolved quietly. Others believe it ended long before Meghan's Hollywood career began to take off. In the months that followed, the differences between Meghan and Joe began to grow deeper. According to sources close to both, she spent more time in Los Angeles chasing auditions while Joe stayed in Chicago. She was focused on her career, constantly talking about building her brand, finding the right roles, and creating her image. Joe, however, was content with a simple life. He wanted family, roots, and routine. He didn't understand the pressure Meghan put on herself to be somebody, and she didn't understand why he wasn't more driven to chase something bigger. At first, Joe tried to make it work, but Meghan was always so busy that she rarely made it to have dinner with his family, and then she'd fly out again. But soon, her visits became less frequent. Joe's parents, especially his mother, started to notice the change. They saw a woman who wanted the world, not a home. They believed she was using Joe as a stepping stone, the first rung on a ladder that didn't include them. Within months, the warmth was gone. Meghan had become an outsider in her own marriage, and by the time she noticed, it was already too late. Although, sources close to Joe believed that he tried everything to keep the relationship steady. He planned trips, offered to move closer to California, even suggested they start a family. However, Meghan always had an excuse, either a new audition, a meeting, or a project. Her focus was elsewhere, and little by little their marriage began to fade. Not long after that, Meghan made her decision. Without any dramatic fight or big announcement, she walked away. The marriage, which had started so quietly, ended the same way quietly and completely. There were no messy court battles or public records. Everything was handled privately. Some reports suggest the marriage was annulled rather than divorced. When it was over, Meghan didn't look back. She threw herself into acting full-time, landing small roles on shows like General Hospital and CSI New York before her big break on Suits. For Joe, the end of the marriage was devastating. Friends said he took a long time to recover. He never spoke publicly about what happened, not to the media, not even years later when Meghan became one of the most famous women in the world. He simply disappeared from the story, choosing silence over attention. Even today, Joe lives a quiet life away from the cameras. He's reportedly remarried, has a family, and still refuses to talk about Meghan. When asked once by a journalist about their time together, he simply said, "That was a lifetime ago." Maybe that's true. Or maybe it's just easier to leave some stories untold. But what if we told you there's more to this story? And that leads us to Joe's family. What really made Joe Guiliano's family turn against Meghan? Keep watching because the answer will shock you. The family that saw through Meghan. As public interest in the Sussexes swells and then sours, a quieter narrative has begun to emerge. One that doesn't scream headlines, but whispers through their choices, appearances, and silences. It's the notion that behind the polished brand of Harry and Meghan lies a widening rift in how they see the world and each other. While both were united in leaving the royal family, their paths since then seem increasingly divergent. Meghan has leaned heavily into media visibility, from Spotify deals and Netflix documentaries to glossy magazine covers and Hollywood connections. She appears to be steering the brand toward constant relevance. Her appearances are carefully curated, her messaging precise, and her image relentlessly polished. For Meghan, the media is not just a tool. It's a platform for control, image management, and influence. Harry, on the other hand, shows signs of fatigue. While he's participated in interviews and signed media deals, his tone has grown more somber, more personal. In his BBC interview, he spoke not of projects or platforms, but of missing his homeland and longing for reconciliation. He appeared more wounded than ambitious, more interested in healing than headlines. It raises a quiet question. Does Harry still want to be in the spotlight? Or is he merely following where the brand goes? Insiders have hinted at strategic disagreements. Some believe Harry favored a lower profile following Spare, while Meghan reportedly encouraged seizing media opportunities before public sentiment shifted too far. If true, it speaks to a deeper divide, not just in strategy, but in vision. Meghan's media-savvy instincts helped shape their global identity, But at what cost to their privacy, their reputation, or their relationship? There's no need to confirm a split to acknowledge a drift. The tension is visible in body language, tone, and timing. While Harry craves reconciliation with his family, Meghan seems to have moved on from that chapter entirely. He wants forgiveness. She wants reinvention. And as this difference plays out in real time, it's not hard to imagine how it could slowly, silently, drive a wedge between them. Not with loud arguments or scandalous leaks, but with choices that speak louder than words. In the end, it may not be outside forces that unravel them, but the quiet pull of two people growing apart under the brightest lights in the world. Following the so-called Reconciliation Summit, what came next was deafening in its silence. There were no public statements from the palace, no reports of a follow-up meeting, no private visit from King Charles, not even a message passed through aides. Just a quiet, deliberate pause, one that felt less like hesitation and more like a calculated cold shoulder. For King Charles, this wasn't an oversight. It was a strategy. The monarch has long been portrayed as a man caught between duty and fatherhood, tradition and compassion. But recent events suggest he may no longer be willing to straddle that line when it comes to Harry. The summit may have been a gesture of goodwill, one perhaps urged by palace advisors or public pressure. But Charles' follow-through was non-existent. And that silence says more than any carefully worded royal press release ever could. Some royal insiders believe this is the king's way of drawing a boundary. After years of bombshell interviews, documentary digs, and Spare's biting revelations, Charles may have reached the limit of what he's willing to tolerate. His son, once a source of deep paternal pride, has become a wild card. Unpredictable, emotional, and at times incendiary. To invite him back into the royal fold without serious concessions would be a risk the monarchy can't afford. But others see a different motivation, one rooted in discipline, not dismissal. This cold shoulder could be Charles' way of forcing Harry to come to him, to stop using the press as a bargaining tool, and stop expecting the palace to fix what he broke. The king may not be saying no, he might simply be saying, "Not like this." Either way, the result is the same, a firm boundary drawn in royal stone. The message is clear. If Harry wants back in, it won't be on his terms, not anymore. Charles is no longer chasing reconciliation. He's letting Harry sit in the silence and decide what that silence really means. For a son so desperate to reconnect, the absence of a response may sting more than outright rejection. Because silence, in royal language, is never empty. It's deliberate, and in this case, it may be the most powerful message of all. What if the silence isn't punishment, but a final test of loyalty that Harry was never prepared to face? Stay tuned. As the dust settles on the failed summit and silence continues to echo from both sides, one question looms larger than ever. Can the House of Windsor truly be healed? Or has the damage, emotional, reputational, and relational, cut too deep to mend? Reconciliation, in theory, should be possible. Families fracture and reunite all the time. Apologies are made, trust is rebuilt, wounds eventually scar over. But the Windsors aren't just any family. They are an institution, steeped in centuries of tradition, guarded by protocol and bound by unwritten rules of silence, stoicism, and self-sacrifice. And Harry and Meghan didn't just break away. They broke the code. The royal family now finds itself in an impossible paradox. To engage with Harry risks more leaks, more headlines, and possibly more betrayal. To ignore him entirely, however, feeds the narrative of a cold, unyielding monarchy, unable to forgive even its own. Every move is scrutinized, every silence interpreted, every glance between family members dissected for hidden meaning. In this climate, trust is more than fragile. It's nearly extinct. Harry, for his part, seems torn between remorse and resolve. He wants connection, but he also wants acknowledgement. Meghan, less inclined toward reconciliation, appears more focused on shaping their post-royal brand than re-entering the royal circle. And King Charles, caught between paternal instinct and sovereign responsibility, seems unwilling or unable to fully commit to either role. Meghan's Chicago secrets. A few years after Meghan walked away from Joe, people in Chicago began talking about a child. No one knew where the rumor started, but it spread too fast to be ignored. It was said that Meghan and Joe Guiliano had a baby girl before everything suddenly fell apart. The whispers said her name was Nola. Others claimed the child was never seen at all, only heard about through bits of conversation, a nurse's memory, or a neighbor who saw someone carrying a baby out late at night. This wasn't just gossip. It felt like the missing piece that made sense of the Guiliano family's sudden disappearance. One day, they were there, living their regular lives in Chicago. The next, the house was empty, blinds shut, and mail piling up. For a family as steady and rooted as the Guilianos, that silence spoke louder than words. The rumors first began around the time Meghan stopped appearing in the neighborhood. Before that, she had been spotted at the small cafe on the corner, or walking to the train station with her hair tucked into a hoodie, always polite, but distant. Then, she was gone. At first, people thought she had gone back to Los Angeles, back to auditions and scripts. But then Joe's mother stopped showing up at church. His father's grocery store was suddenly sold to another family. Their home, which had always been full of life, friends, noise, the smell of Sunday sauce went dark. Those who lived nearby said it happened quickly. It was like they just got up one morning and decided to leave everything, a neighbor recalled in one interview years later. Here's the point where it all started making sense. If you look closer, though, there were small clues that something deeper was going on. A few people remembered seeing Meghan at a small hospital on the South Side. It wasn't one of the big, well-known ones, just a local clinic that didn't keep heavy media attention. A nurse who worked there back in 2008 mentioned, years later, that a woman matching Meghan's description came in late one evening under a different last name. She was quiet, polite, and didn't stay long. Another worker said she remembered a man who looked protective but nervous, pacing in the waiting room, holding paperwork. It's impossible to say if this woman was Meghan. There's no birth certificate, no official document, nothing confirmed. But the timing lined up too neatly with the Guiliano family's sudden vanishing act for people not to notice. What made the story stranger was how carefully everyone involved avoided talking about it. Meghan never mentioned that period publicly. The Guilianos never gave interviews. Even the people who had been close to the family acted like those months never happened. According to an unknown reporter, it was mentioned that the family vanished like they were protecting someone. And that's the part that never left people's minds. Because if there really was a baby, the Guilianos might have decided the only way to keep her safe was to disappear entirely. The story of Noelle, if that really was her name, became a local legend. Some said she looked like Joe's side of the family, with dark hair and soft brown eyes. Others said she had Meghan's lighter skin and small, delicate features. But the truth is, no one could prove she even existed. It was just fragments of rumors from a hospital, a neighbor's memory, whispers from people who knew more than they would ever admit. Still, every rumor pointed in the same direction. Something happened that forced the family to vanish. Maybe it was pressure from outside. Maybe someone wanted to keep the child's identity secret. Or maybe, as some claimed, the Guilianos realized that keeping a child linked to someone soon to be famous could bring danger, not protection. Whatever the reason, what's undeniable is that after the supposed birth, every trace of the family vanished, like it had been wiped clean. Their phone numbers disconnected. Their names disappeared from property listings. Even relatives back in Italy refused to speak when asked by journalists years later. For many people in Chicago, the mystery became almost haunting. How could an entire family vanish in the middle of a city and leave no trail? How could a story involving someone who would later marry into royalty just disappear like that? It didn't help that this was before social media took over. Back then, you could still vanish if you wanted to. There were no constant posts, no GPS tags, no viral pictures. If someone changed their name or left town quietly, the world wouldn't notice for months or ever. That's likely what happened here. Joe and his parents may have packed what they could and left under different names. Around the same time the Guilianos disappeared, she was seen again in California, smiling, auditioning. If there had been a baby, she wouldn't speak of it. If there had been heartbreak or guilt, she carried it quietly. To those who knew her, it seemed like she wanted to leave the Chicago chapter completely behind. Friends said she was focused, determined, and more guarded than before. When asked about her past, she gave vague answers, nothing specific, just a smile and a short reply. But where is Joe today? This question leads us across the ocean, in the quiet towns of southern Italy. And it's there, among the olive trees and hidden archives, that the story begins to open again. Spare the crown, spoil the trust. If Harry and Meghan's exit shook the monarchy, what came next cracked its foundations. In a series of increasingly personal revelations, first through Oprah Winfrey's bombshell interview, then the explosive Netflix docuseries, and finally Harry's memoir Spare, the couple made sure the world heard their version of the royal story, and in doing so, they shattered what little trust remained between them and the institution they left behind. In Spare, Harry peeled back the curtain on palace life with astonishing detail. From deeply private family conversations to raw accounts of his relationship with Prince William and Queen Camilla, the memoir read less like a reflection and more like a retaliation. Royal tradition thrives on discretion. Harry, however, made privacy a one-way street, fiercely protective of his own family, yet unflinching in exposing the inner workings of his birthright. Then came the Netflix series, which positioned the couple as misunderstood victims trapped in an outdated system. Archival footage, unseen images, and curated commentary reinforced a narrative of betrayal by the media, the monarchy, and even family members. Viewers were captivated. The palace was horrified. But it was the Oprah interview that arguably did the most damage. Meghan's allegation that a royal family member speculated about her son's skin tone cast a global shadow over the House of Windsor. Without naming names, the couple ignited a firestorm. The palace's creed of "never complain, never explain" was put to the ultimate test and left looking painfully outdated in the age of streaming confessions and viral sympathy. Within the monarchy, Harry and Meghan's media crusade raised a chilling question. How can you rebuild trust with someone who profits from your pain? Conversations once whispered behind palace walls now lived forever in print and pixels. For senior royals, any future reconciliation came with a risk. Say the wrong thing, and it might headline tomorrow's tabloids. What Harry framed as catharsis, the Crown interpreted as betrayal. And what Meghan called speaking her truth became, to the firm, a cautionary tale. Trust, once broken, isn't healed by words. It demands silence. And that, so far, is the one thing the Sussexes haven't offered. And could that silence from the king be the firm's final message to Harry? A quiet exile louder than words? Stay tuned. In the wake of his media disclosures and self-imposed exile, Prince Harry found himself staring down a wall far more daunting than any institution: the silence of his own father. Despite Harry's repeated public and private efforts to extend an olive branch, King Charles has remained largely unresponsive, choosing instead to speak through aides, courtiers, and carefully worded palace statements. Direct father-to-son contact has all but evaporated. For Harry, this silence is devastating. In interviews, he has openly admitted how much it pains him that his father won't take his calls. The same man who once walked him behind his mother's coffin now won't pick up the phone. Even as Charles battles cancer and grapples with his advancing age, Harry's efforts to reach across the divide have been met not with hostility, but something colder: distance. This isn't just about family estrangement, it's also about power, control, and legacy. As monarch, Charles must weigh not only his role as a father, but also as the sovereign protector of an institution Harry has repeatedly criticized. To speak to his son now risks appearing weak, or worse, complicit. And with the monarchy's public trust on fragile footing, the stakes have never been higher. But Harry's appeals seem deeply human, not strategic. He has acknowledged their differences. He said candidly that he would love reconciliation. He has expressed concern that time may be running out, referencing his father's declining health with a vulnerability rarely seen in royal circles. There's a sense of urgency in his voice, a quiet desperation not just to make amends, but to be seen, heard, and forgiven. Yet King Charles, for all his talk of modernizing the monarchy, has chosen silence as his defense. Some say it's constitutional prudence. Others see it as a father choosing the crown over his child. Either way, the void between them deepens. What makes it all the more painful is that for Harry, this was never about titles or duties. It was about his children knowing their grandfather, about healing a wound that fame, wealth, and geography have only made worse. But without words, without acknowledgement, the king's silence speaks volumes. And Harry, once again, is left out in the cold. Desperate for reconciliation. Beneath Prince Harry's public defiance lies something quieter and far more telling: a deep longing to reconcile. Stripped of titles, security, and tradition, Harry hasn't completely severed emotional ties with the family he left behind. And nowhere is that more evident than in his repeated, often ignored gestures toward peace, especially with his father, King Charles. Over the past few years, Harry has sent subtle and not-so-subtle olive branches to Buckingham Palace. He invited his father to the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games, an event that stands as one of Harry's proudest legacies. The invitation went unanswered. No royal showed up. The silence was deafening. Still, Harry didn't lash out. In a heartfelt interview with the BBC, he stripped away the royal polish and spoke like a son, not a prince. His voice cracked with emotion as he expressed frustration over the palace's decision to strip his family of security, describing it as an old-fashioned establishment stitch-up. But more striking was his openness about grief, love, and regret. "I would love reconciliation with my family," he said. "I've moved past a lot. I can forgive." His words weren't rehearsed. They were raw, tinged with sorrow and quiet desperation. He admitted not knowing how much longer his father had left. He spoke of wanting Charles to know his grandchildren, to be part of their lives, even from a distance. It wasn't a demand for power or prestige, it was a plea for connection. But despite these emotional appeals, the palace has remained cautious. To them, Harry is still a liability, a man who once aired royal secrets on global stages and published a memoir full of private details. The trust isn't there, but Harry keeps reaching anyway. Because for him, the monarchy may be out of reach, but his father, at least in his heart, is not. Reconciliation isn't a strategy. It's a need, one he can't seem to let go of, no matter how many doors remain closed. And could Harry's relentless hope be the very thing forcing the monarchy's hand, or just fueling another royal illusion? Keep watching. Reasons for their silence. By the time the Guilianos left Chicago, it wasn't just their house that felt empty. It was as if their entire existence had been carefully erased. No goodbyes, no forwarding address, not even a trace of where they'd gone. The moving truck rolled in before sunrise, and by noon, the home that once buzzed with laughter and weekend barbecues was hollow and still. Curtains fluttered in the open air, and the faint smell of lemon polish hung in rooms stripped bare of life. Neighbors stood on the sidewalks that afternoon, whispering guesses no one could prove. Some said Joe Guiliano had gotten into trouble with the wrong kind of people. Others swore his wife, Anna, had taken the children and vanished overseas. But what made the story linger wasn't their disappearance. It was what they left behind, hiding from something darker. What could drive a family to erase their own existence? It wasn't until much later that faint traces of the Guilianos began to surface across the Atlantic. A closed bank account in Milan, a property deed signed under an unfamiliar name in Sicily. Locals in a small coastal town recalled a reserved couple who spoke Italian with an American lilt. The woman introduced herself as Anna Lucia, known for her strict manners but unexpected kindness. The man was simply Joseph, quiet, polite, and always glancing over his shoulder. With them was a little girl who rarely spoke, never attended the local school, and was often seen staring at the sea as if waiting for something or someone. No one asked too many questions. In southern Italy, secrets are kept like heirlooms, polished, protected, and never spoken of aloud. Yet even among those accustomed to mystery, and the mailbox still faintly carrying their name, neighbors say they left quietly, taking nothing but a few suitcases. No farewell, no forwarding address, no explanation. To most, it looked like a routine move. But those who knew them better whispered that something about their exit felt rehearsed, too quiet, too precise, almost as if they wanted to disappear, not relocate. For years, silence was the only answer anyone got. The family's phone numbers went dead. Their social records stopped cold. And even relatives who once sent Christmas cards heard nothing again. Some thought they had fled, financial troubles. Others believed they were. The name appeared from nowhere, like a whisper from a secret past. Clara took the bracelet to her parish priest, hoping for answers. But the moment he saw it, his expression changed. He told her to burn it immediately and never speak of it again. That, of course, only deepened the mystery. Around Chicago's Italian community, quiet rumors began to take shape. Some claimed the Guilianos had fled to Calabria under assumed names, while others insisted they'd been spotted in Montreal months later. But beneath the swirl of gossip was one persistent and unsettled. Months later, a woman named Clara, who once lived across the street, received a small brown parcel with no return address. It was postmarked from a tiny coastal town in southern Italy. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet, the kind a mother might give her daughter. It bore one simple engraving, Lucia. The problem was, no one had ever heard of Lucia in the Guiliano family. Not Joe and Anna's neighbors, not their relatives who occasionally visited from New Jersey. The Guilianos stood out. They lived modestly, paid in cash, and avoided the camera lens. Once, during a village festival, someone tried to take a group photograph. Joseph stepped aside, his hand on the child's shoulder, politely declining with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. Years later, journalists digging into Meghan's early past, long before the palace, before the headlines, found gaps that defied logic. Entire months missing from official timelines, sealed documents, and a curious photograph taken near Lake Como in the late 1990s. In it, Meghan appears to be walking along a narrow path, her face turned toward the water. But behind her, almost out of focus, a man holds a little girl's hand. His face is hidden from view, but the stance, the build, something about it raised questions no one could answer. Who was that man? And why did the image vanish from public archives not long after it resurfaced online? The more investigators searched, the more the story unraveled into quiet speculation. Some suggested the Guilianos knew something, or someone, they weren't supposed to. Others hinted at family ties hidden by design. Theory. The child named Lucia wasn't Joe's. She was Meghan's. The claim sounded absurd at first, yet the timing raised questions too strange to ignore. Meghan Markle's early years were carefully documented, but there was a peculiar gap in her college timeline. One missing semester that had quietly disappeared from records. Could it be coincidence, or was it deliberately hidden? But what really happened during Meghan's missing semester? And how does it connect to the Guiliano family's sudden disappearance? Let's dive into this puzzling mystery. A mystery that refused to fade. The story of the Guiliano family didn't end. It simply dissolved, like ink washed from a page. Their Chicago home, once alive with noise and laughter, now stands abandoned. The paint peeling from its windows, fragments of truth buried beneath layers of reinvention. Whatever the reason, their silence became their shield. Today, that abandoned house in Chicago remains untouched, frozen in time. The neighbors still say that on quiet nights, you can almost hear a door creak open and the echo of footsteps fading down the hall. And somewhere far away, in an Italian village where English words are still whispered with caution, the name Guiliano lingers like a ghost, a reminder that some disappearances are not about escape, but about survival. Perhaps the Guiliano didn't vanish to hide from the world. Perhaps they vanished to protect something the world was never meant to find.